Thank you. There's cameras everywhere. I could turn around. No side shots, please. Yeah, this is great. This is so wonderful to see. What a great idea for an event. This is fantastic to see. There's cameras coming up everywhere. I got rid of my Spanx during COVID. For a while, I was double bagging it. And then one day I was at a restaurant and I was like, this is enough. And I went in the bathroom, peeled off my Spanx. Sorry, all of you who do not know what Spanx are, some confused faces in the house. It's like industrial granny panties. It's like a sausage casing that at the end of the day, it's like, anyway, I digress. This is wonderful. And I'm just getting used to talking in person again. Everyone's looking at me. It's not like being on the radio or doing a Zoom event. I had to get dressed from the waist down as well. There's no PJ pants today. But thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to talk about food, because this is something I'm very passionate about. I feel a little bit like, who's that talk show host who walks around and Ellen DeGeneres? There will be no dancing, no dancing. So I have had an interest in food for my whole life. My mom tells a story of when I was 3 and I asked when I could cook for myself. And she said, when you can read a recipe by yourself, you can cook for yourself. So I went off with a stack of cookbooks and learned to read and came back and said, Mom, what's a tibispa? And she was like, a what? A tibispa. She goes, use it in a sentence. Add 2 tibispa of sugar. So food has always been my thing. And I think I learned to love it early on because I realized how it made people happy. I noticed how it connected people, and I learned how to make cupcakes, partially because I was really hungry and loved cupcakes. And at the time, my mom was very healthy. She was making applesauce. Remember when we used applesauce and prune puree as a fat replacement? Doesn't work as well as we thought it did. And I was like, I'm gonna learn how to make my own cupcakes. So I learned that there was a lot of power in food in terms of connecting people. It's a very personal thing. It's deeply rooted in our families, in our socioeconomic systems, in terroir, in immigration patterns. Nostalgia is closely connected with food. And it's something that we can all relate to. We all have stories, whether they're positive or not, about food and how we like to eat. I also grew up in the thick of diet culture. How many of you can relate to that? Weight Watchers and Diet Center and calculating everything I ate because I grew up a size that was not socially acceptable. And it was assumed that if you're a size that was not socially acceptable, you were always trying to not be and always failing. So I had a complicated relationship with food growing up, but I kind of pushed past that and became a food writer, because what's interesting to me about food is how people feed each other at home. We hear a lot in the wellness realm with social media these days. Back, of course, in the days of magazines, a lot of it was focused on food and wellness and nutrition and what we should be eating and what we shouldn't be eating and clean eating. How much time do we have? I won't talk about clean eating. But there's a lot of food shaming. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot to weed through. And when it comes down to it, food is more than just nutrition. It's connection. It's how we celebrate. It's how we nourish each other. It's how we support each other. It's how we show love for each other. Are you on video?
No.
It's okay. Can I see that photo afterwards? I'm just joking. But there's so much more to food than just the building blocks, the fat, the carbohydrates, the simple sugars, the nutrients, that there's so much more that goes into food. And it's something that we can all do to show support for each other. So before the pandemic, 1/3 of Canadians followed some sort of dietary regime, whether it was Whole30 or paleo or veganism or vegetarianism. And during the pandemic, everything kind of shifted. And a lot of people sort of tossed all that out the window. A lot of people didn't have the capacity to keep up with these programs that I think gave a lot of people a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. A lot of people like a set of rules to follow, even when it comes to food. I do not. I followed rules for a long time. And so there was this big shift when it became more difficult to grocery shop. We couldn't just run to the store for something that we needed. There was a lot of financial insecurity. There was a lot of worry. There was a lot of, digging into those dishes that made us feel comforted, made us feel good. I went out one day during the pandemic and bought a box of cream of wheat. Who here likes cream of wheat? So do I, for the record. But growing up, my mom used to give us cream of wheat. She would hide the raisins in the bottom of the bowl. And you'd have to find the raisins, right? And one day I was just so sad. I was like, I need to buy some cream of wheat. So I went and bought a box of cream of wheat, put the raisins in the bottom of the bowl. I hid them from myself. And I ate it, and I was like, that kind of tastes like the box that the cream of wheat came in, but it was so comforting, right? It was so nostalgic. So we saw waves of sourdough starter. In 2020, I could have spent the whole year answering questions about yeast and sourdough starters and how to keep your sourdough alive. But people had more time to cook. They had less money to cook. They had limited ability to run to the grocery store for an ingredient. So people were starting to use what they had, which I think is really important now as we see food prices through the roof. So people were addressing food waste. People were eating like the fruitcakes from their freezer from 20 years ago. People were texting me frozen things. What is this and can I eat it? But we were, right? Because we couldn't just run to the store. So it changed the way we eat in a lot of ways. One of my favorite things to come from the pandemic, sorry you guys are getting the back of me. I'll just give them the back of me for a while. I'll talk to you. Door drops. I loved coming home from a dog walk and there was cookies and soup and things on my doorstep. It was amazing the lengths we went to stay connected with people through food. Having Zoom dinners. People were dropping off meals at houses so that we could all eat the same thing because food is such a connector. You can make me cry. I think we have so many opportunities to stay connected through food. And, generationally, our food habits are very different from generation to generation. How we cook, where we source recipes has changed hugely with the internet. I used to clip out recipes from the newspaper and get recipes from my neighbors. And now we have an unlimited capacity for recipes, for knowledge, for videos. And we all have to eat, right? We all have to eat every day. So challenging times, right? How do we afford to cook? How do we afford to eat well? And that's a huge concern right now. Something I could talk about for hours. But I have addressed some strategies on CBC and in the Globe and Mail. And learning how to cook, knowing what to do with what we have, is a big part of it. And a lot of us sort of grew up thinking, those of us who didn't live with food insecurity, I never had to worry about where my next meal came from. Would approach food meal times with, what do you feel like eating? What are you in the mood for? Which is a really spoiled stance. When my son, who's 17, says I don't feel like having that, that's a really privileged position to be in. When he looks in the fridge and says, there's nothing in here. Well, there's a potato. There's some oil. You could make latkes, right? And so one thing that I do with my son and with my, I have grandnieces and nephews now, is we say, let's look in the fridge and see what's there and think of what we could do with like a black box challenge, So knowing what to do with what we have. Shopping sales, when you find something that's on sale, if it's something you're not familiar with, maybe it's a red potato instead of a Yukon Gold potato, being flexible can help. Frozen fruits and vegetables, frozen produce is nutritionally just as good as fresh. And I think a lot of people I think they have to have fresh fruits and vegetables. The nutrients can as the vegetables break down, as they're stored, as they're shipped, fresh is often better nutrition-wise. Texturally, they're different, but you also don't get as much food waste. When you buy a container of blueberries and there's a little clump of mold in the corner and it spreads, you throw half of it away, but with frozen, you don't tend to waste quite as much. So knowing what to do with what we have, using everything. You can freeze everything. I think the biggest question that I get is, can I freeze that? The answer is yes to everything. How it comes out of the freezer might be questionable. If it's dairy, it can tend to separate, but you can still use it in pancakes and things like that. You can make butter. Don't worry, I won't go off on a tangent about butter. But you can freeze just about anything and pull it out, put it in a stew, a soup, a curry, whatever will cook it down, because structurally it'll break down in the freezer and come out a different texture. So you might not make a salad out of the lettuce that you froze. Yes, you can freeze lettuce and you can put it in soup. You can put everything in soup. Turns out I've turned into my dad. I put fiber in everything. He's a gastroenterologist. Would put oat bran in everything. Now I put lentils in everything. I put vegetables in everything. I cook the scraps when I peel potatoes. I boil them or roast them and eat them. So there are strategies. Pulses, meat is so expensive right now. I'm sure some of you have seen the pictures of the $71 steaks and the $71 for 2 steaks. And then there was chicken breasts that were like $37. It's crazy. Pulses, so beans, chickpeas, lentils, grow really well in the prairies. A lot of people don't realize that Saskatchewan is the biggest exporter of lentils in the world. And they're good for us, they're inexpensive. Whether they're canned or dried, they're cheap. They have fiber, they have protein, they have all the things that we want. And they fix the nitrogen in the soil, so they're good for crop rotation. So they're good for the farmers, they're good for the land, they're good for us. And beans and grains are, complete protein. So that's a way to start thinking. And then in terms of connection, because I know we're not just talking about affordability, but how do you connect around food? And I don't think it's just eating around the table. I think it's cooking together. One of my favorite things during the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, is everyone in the kitchen cooking together. And when someone has a baby, we always, let's get together and stock their freezer. We could do that all the time. I met a woman recently who rented a community hall once a month, and she and her friends all cooked together. And they would each choose a recipe. Each person would bring ingredients, and they'd go home with, and that also addresses getting sick of your own cooking. I got sick of my own cooking during the pandemic, and a couple friends and I started a soup swap. So we'd make a big batch of soup and then drop on each other's doorstep. So I had, 5 different kinds of soup instead of 1 kind of soup. And so that saves money, it saves time. And it makes things a little bit more interesting, because we all get into ruts, even me. But spending time in the kitchen together, whether you're cooking, you're sitting at the kitchen table while someone else is cooking, we learn so much from each other. And this is one thing that I love about food. It's impossible to know everything about food. There's always something to learn. And even the act of grocery shopping, we will get to a Q&A in like 1 minute. I swear I'll stop talking. In case anyone has burning questions. The other day, I went for a walk with a friend, and we went for coffee, we went to the bookstore, and then I was like, I have to go shopping for CBC the next morning. And she was like, I'll come with you. And we went grocery shopping together, which sounds like a simple thing, but it was so fun, and it was so much better than shopping by myself. So shopping together, cooking together, bringing kids into the kitchen so that they develop a love of cooking instead of seeing it as a chore, which I know a lot of people do. Whoever lumped up cooking and cleaning together, cooking and cleaning is not at all the same thing, at all. But learning from each other. I always seek out people with different family backgrounds who can show me how to make dishes that I'm not familiar with. And being there in the kitchen with them to see and smell, and because sharing the recipe doesn't always work. And it's not always accurate. I have friends who call me and they're like, can you come and watch my mom make this, her chutney? Because she gave me the recipe, it's not right. And then I watched, I'm like, yeah, no, that's not what she wrote down. And I'm pretty sure it was intentional. But spending time in the kitchen together, as well as at the table, and being supportive of each other in that way, and being aware of people in our communities. And that's something that we really learned to do a better job of during COVID, is pay attention to where that need is and asking if people need support or need help. Or, it's hard to ask for help, but it's not hard to ask somebody if they need support, or just offer it. Don't even ask. Just, I made way too much cake. I'm gonna drop some off. I know that's not a thing. That's not a thing. I know it's past 11:30 already. Should we do some Q&As? Q&As? Q's and A's? Oh, you have a question, yes.
Yes, I have a question about lettuce. I had no idea you could freeze lettuce, and I'm not sure I actually want to. What does it look like when it comes out of the freezer?
It looks like trash when it comes out of the freezer. So the question was, I didn't know you could freeze lettuce. What does it look like? So anything that you freeze, anything with more moisture freezes better than something that's dry. So when I do baking, I suggest people freeze the unbaked product and bake it from frozen, or let it thaw and then bake it. So lettuce has a lot of moisture in it, but the cell structure, the moisture expands and breaks the cell structure so that when it thaws, that's why you put lettuce in the freezer. It's probably wilty to begin with, and it comes out and it's kind of a puddle, but you can put it in your soup, right? You put other greens in your soup, why not lettuce? And produce is the number one food that's wasted, right? We buy a bunch of cilantro and we use half of it and toss the rest away. Lettuce, spinach, fragile greens, they can all go in the freezer. They can be thrown in soup. You can puree the soup. A pureed soup masks all kinds of textural issues. Just puree it. So something like a broccoli and cheese soup, a bean and spinach soup, throw in some lettuce. You guys look suspicious. It's true. I really don't, food waste is, I could talk for hours about food waste. Yes.
What are some tips for the everyday cook to sort of fall in love with cooking? Because I'm so much of a goal-orientated person, and I look at cooking as this, the means to an end. Mm-hmm. How do you fall in love with that process?
And it happens every day. Like, I have to make dinner again. These people are hungry again. I have to feed them again. I just fed them 3 hours ago. How do you fall in love with the process? That's a good question, because we all kind of get into ruts, right? And I think if you can afford to cook more than you need, you can kind of get a head start on the next day, right? So if I'm making rice for dinner, I make twice as much. It's a great start for fried rice, right? If I'm roasting a chicken and I do 2 instead of 1, you have a head start on the next day. And it's funny because there's a stigma around leftovers. People just put them in the fridge and forget about them. I don't want to eat that again. But I see it as a challenge. Much like a buffet, I see it as a personal challenge. Crickets. That was a joke. A buffet is a personal challenge. All you can eat. All you can eat. But if you have a roasted chicken to start, you don't have to start with your onion and your carrots and your celery. You sort of start from the beginning and you're sauteing your chicken for your sauce. Trying new things, assigning somebody else. If you have other people in your household, when I was a kid, my sisters and I each had 1 night per week that we had to cook. And we had to tell my mom on the weekend, and she would get what we needed to. And then it became a little bit of a competition, right? We tried to one-up each other a little bit, as sisters do. I always won, of course. No, I totally didn't. But yeah, and going to the library and looking at cookbooks, trying something new, that helps for me, Or invite people over who can cook and be like, I'm really tired. I'm going to lie down on the couch. Can you make dinner? Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Not so much a question as I'd love to hear your comment about organic versus non-organic. Versus
no. How much time do we have?
Yeah, I'm sure you've been asked this before.
There's a lot.
Please.
There's a lot. I think organics are different in Canada than the US. A lot of organics come from a long way. A lot of farmers can't afford the organic certification. So knowing your farmer, knowing where your food comes from, free range, having access to the outdoors. A lot of these labels don't have a whole lot of meaning, right? People say, oh, I buy only grass-fed butter. I promise I won't talk about butter. So just because they have access to the outdoors doesn't mean they're just frolicking in the right? But maybe they are. It depends on the farmer, right? Get to know your farmers. Labels are really misleading. Often what you see on the front of the label is the marketing, and what you see on the back is the actual information. I shop at the Crossroads Market. I like the Crossroads Farmers Market, and I know a lot of farmers personally just because of my work. So, yeah, be suspicious. Lots of that. That's a whole other. Can we do another session just on like food politics and food labels and things that shouldn't be happening in the food world? Oh, yes.
I was wondering if you could share a couple of surprising food questions you've received.
Oh my gosh, surprising food questions. I'll think of some good ones as I'm driving away today. Surprising food questions. I had someone ask me, she had been driving all over the city looking for an ingredient and couldn't find it. And it was orange zest. But she thought it was separate, right? Which, like, that's fine, like it's on the orange. She was like, oh, that's why I couldn't find it. I was doing a cooking a bacon class once, and I think people are so worried about, they have performance anxiety around food, and I think that Food Network and all the competition shows have a lot to do with that. Why do there need to be cupcake wars? Dinner party wars? We have enough wars. We don't need wars in the kitchen. And someone was making chocolate cake and mixing. He had his hand all the way in the bottom of the chocolate cake bowl, and he was mixing all the way up to his arm. And I was like, oh no, we're out of spatulas. So I found a spatula, I brought it to him, and he said, no, the recipe says to mix it by hand. But he was trying so hard to do it, right? So I was like, oh yeah, I need to think of that when I write a recipe, because by hand, yes, I'm mixing it by hand. He was mixing it by hand. Surprising food questions, I don't know. I mean, one of the biggest questions was, why is my butter so firm at room temperature? Yeah, I know. You've heard that story. Jimmy Fallon made a joke about it. Huh? Okay, so they're like, don't start talking about butter. Any other questions? Just Google Buttergate, and I wrote about it a couple years ago. It took over the first half of my 2021.
I'm just curious what your favorite restaurants are in Calgary.
Oh!
Loaded, I know. Loaded question.
Loaded. Depends on who's paying. The question was, what are your favorite restaurants? Who's paying? What day it is? What are my favorite restaurants in Calgary? I've always loved Ida's, the Mohammed Ida's on 4th Street. Some of them have closed during the pandemic. I really love Klein Harris downtown. The owners are a couple. Christina Ma is the mixologist, and her husband is the chef. I loved, I'm not going to tell you about places that have closed. I live in Inglewood, and Rouge. I often it's the owners that they kind of cloud my opinion, because I love Paul and Ollie, who own Rouge, and the first year of the pandemic, opened up the restaurant, and we had volunteers making lunches for kids for a year, but these pop-up. So I'll always, have a warm place in my heart for Rouge. I also can't always afford it. That's a good question, yeah. What's everyone else, who has a favorite restaurant in town? I don't eat out as much as people think I do. I cook a lot.
Because you have leftovers to eat.
I have so many leftovers to eat, I know. I keep buying stuff. Any more questions? I don't want to run into the next, yes.
What would be your last meal?
Oh my God.
Last meal.
The question was last meal. Oh my gosh.
Combination of Food Network and psychology.
Again, it depends on the day. I love having people cook for me. And people often say, oh, I would never invite you over for dinner. I'm like, have you met me? Because I'm not going to critique your food. I love Indian food. Last night we had dinner from Namaskar on 16th Avenue. That answers your question as well. And I hadn't had food from there for years. It was amazing. The dal was amazing. I love curries. I love naan. I love bread. I would just eat toast, honestly. My last meal would be toast. It'd just be toast. It'd be a whole loaf of raisin bread toasted with butter. Let's be honest. Also, pizza and wine. Oh, Posto. I shouldn't say this, but I should because it's applicable. Best happy hour from 3 till 6 every day. Their pizzas are half price and their bottles of wine are half price. And they have amazing pizza. The potato pizza at Posto is amazing. I love pizza and wine. I think is the best. I think that would. I can't choose. That's why I only have one child. I can't choose a favorite. Any other questions? I thought I saw another hand. Oh, here.
Are you in favor of the menu plan, or do you like to wing it?
Am I in favor of the menu plan, or do I like to wing it? I am in favor of whatever works for you. You know, if it's Instant Pot, that's totally fine. If it's an air fryer, it's totally fine. It's a little mini convection oven. They're great. I have an air fryer. My son loves it. It's great for cooking small quantities of things. I know that wasn't your question. What was your question?
People say make a menu plan.
Oh, menu plan. A menu plan. Yeah, if that works for you. I don't do a menu plan because my work is food, right? So I'm writing for Chatelaine or for the Globe and Mail. So I'm always testing things. And often it's out of season. Like often I'm doing, a Christmas dinner in August because the lead time is so great. But yeah, menu plan for sure. I remember my mom's friend when we were a kid had a year of recipes in a recipe box and she would just go through them. Didn't matter what was going on in the world. Tuna casserole is up next. We're having tuna casserole. Just went through it, right? So whatever works, yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, right now, I think having some flexibility with your shopping list is a good thing so you can buy things on sale. But yeah, whatever works is the right way to do it. I thought I saw another hand over here. Yeah. Feel free to just yank me like the Gong Show. I'm dating myself.
So my husband and I, we do a lot of cooking with our kids. So we are fortunate enough to be able to afford whatever groceries, but we often get the fresh herbs to put in something, but then I always end up with, you buy a pack of it and you always end up with tons of leftovers.
Totally.
And I hate when it goes bad. What is the best way to save that?
Oh, I love these questions. Okay, so the question was, did you hear the question? Is it herbs? So yeah, and you buy a clamshell or a bundle of them and they go bad. So depending on the herb, the fragile ones tend to just sort of wilt. The sturdier ones like thyme and rosemary, you dry out. So you can dry your herbs. I wouldn't dry basil, but things like rosemary and thyme. Spread them out on a baking sheet. In Calgary, honestly, you can just leave them on your countertop. It's so dry here, just leave them. Or put them in the oven at the very, very lowest setting, and then I'll just like warm it up a little bit and turn it off and let them dry, and then so you can dry them. You can freeze them. You can freeze them in oil. You can do it in your ice cube tray. Do you remember ice cube trays? Do we have ice cube trays anymore? I feel like such a grown-up. A couple years ago, I got an ice maker. You can freeze them in oil. You can freeze them just in a bundle. Or depending on, like the more fragile herbs, like cilantro is one that I buy tons of. And basil, you can make a dressing or a dip or a green sauce, like a fresh green sauce, and just blitz them in the food processor. So what I usually do with cilantro is I chop the stems, because you all use your cilantro stems, right? Right? Yeah. I sort of chop the stems to put in things, and the used leaves are on top, and then I end up with the middle, right? The middle of and I throw it in a blender with jalapeno, lime, garlic, a little bit of sour cream or yogurt, blend it, and it's like this amazing green sauce that you can put on anything. But you can make all kinds of fresh dressings and sauces with herbs too.
But there's no way to keep them fresh to use like 5 or 6 days later.
They should last. So if you put a paper towel in the bag, because moisture is the enemy, right? Like if you put a paper towel in, it'll absorb extra moisture, so that will help it last longer. Does anyone else have other tips? Because I know, like, people know tons of stuff about food. I learn I was at an event with, I'm going to totally name drop right now, Michael Smith, the big tall chef. Oh, am I drawing?
You can tell your story.
I can tell it
Sorry, as you draw.
as I draw. And a friend of mine was with me, and she said, "Oh, I keep my brown sugar in the freezer." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "What?" It was more impressive that he said what. She's like, "Did I just tell you something you don't know?" And he was like, "What?" Of course, we all learn tips, and it was something that her mom did. Everyone's like, "Read what's in your hand." And so, yeah, he's like, "I can totally try that." Like people who've been doing it for years and years. Jessica Boonstra. Jessica Boonstra? There she is! You want a book? So yeah, I'm always learning things. I learn tons from the kids because the kids are like, they don't have any preconceived notions about stuff. They think of things, I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, why did I never think of that? Jackie Kleiner. Oh, yay! You got a book.
So does the brown sugar, is it to keep it from drying out so it'll be soft when you go to use it?
I guess. I've actually never tried it because things tend to dry out in the freezer, but I guess it works. I think, right? Yeah. I go through brown sugar so fast, it typically doesn't dry out. Madeth. Madeth? Oh, yay! You want a book!
So we have two five, right? Two more.
Yeah, two more. Jeffrey Yang. I had my thumb over here. Oh, yay! Sitting right next to me.
Perfect.
Drum roll. Please. Karen Cook. Oh, yay! Awesome! Thank you. All right. Any more questions, or shall I stop talking now? One more? Okay. Oh, tips for cooking for one.
Without putting it
Without making a big batch. It's hard because so many recipes are scaled to feeds 4 or 5, right? I think if you had an air fryer, it's like a little oven. It's a tiny convection oven. Technically, frying is cooking in oil, so it's the marketing that I have issue with air frying, not the actual units. But they're good because you don't have to heat up your whole oven either, right? So things like omelets, things like stir fries, fried rice, things that you can make any quantity, right? A big salad, a bowl of things. I like having like garlicky tahini sauce and different, like that green sauce that I make all the time with herbs, and then having ingredients prepped in my fridge, like roasted vegetables. I will make a big pan of roasted vegetables and keep them in the fridge. So I started talking about the stigma of leftovers, right? If we go to one of these gourmet shops that has prepared meals, I'm going to name drop again. I had talked to Ina Garten last year on the phone. I know. And she was like, people buy at my store at Barefoot Contessa, they buy like, roasted chicken and this and that, and they take it home and eat it for dinner the next day. And it's essentially leftovers. It's just the first time you're eating them. So, right? But you can prepare large quantities and have it in your fridge all week long. And I know you don't want to make like a big batch of chili and then you're eating chili every day, right? But things like roasted vegetables, things like dough for naan or pizza, I keep in the fridge because it slows the rise, and I'll pull off a ball of the dough and roll. Maybe I should just send a bunch of recipes your way and roll it out and cook it in a skillet. And there's a world of flatbreads that you can do this way, and just have fresh bread, right? So yeah, I often cook for one, and it's not as challenging as you might think. If the sort of one dish meals tend to work well, pastas, right? Risotto is amazing. If you remember, the formula for risotto is 1 part rice to 4 parts liquid stock. It could even be water. The Bon Appetit best risotto is made with salted water, and I've tried it and it's fine. And you can put anything in risotto. You could put tomatoes in, you could put a beet in, you could put squash in, you could put like a half a sausage that you have left over. And if you can make oatmeal, you can make risotto. You just stir it until it absorbs. It's just stirring, yeah. And you can it's the same amount of work for 1 or 5 or 10, right? So that kind of thing, cooking for one, Maybe I should do a book. Yeah, one, just one. Yeah. Oh, one more question.
Wasn't going to be this person that keeps everybody from lunch. But talking about cooking for one, my mom is a senior. She has a friend who's a senior who had this brilliant idea. She does a whole meal, but then makes herself TV dinners and freezes them one at a time, and so then she can pull out a variety.
Totally.
And I thought that was brilliant.
I used to do that for, yes, that is totally brilliant. I used to do that for my mother-in-law years ago. I would, every time I made dinner, I made extra and I froze a TV dinner, and put foil and froze it, and totally, yeah. But you do get tired of frozen food all the time too. So cooking some fresh things, yeah. Anyway, thank you and hello. All right.
Okay, thanks Julie so much. I'm sure
Thank
you'll
you.
be here all day with questions.